nerds, what's up? So I very recently finished the fantastic book A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, which was a 5-star, just fantastic read. And it is a fantasy or magical realism book, depending on how you view it, that explores grief. It's funny because I'm increasingly in spaces where sci-fi and fantasy novels are taken very seriously, and we all understand their literary merit and their place in the history of literature in general. But every once in a while, I wander into places where I still hear kind of the tired narrative of fantasy novels are childish, unserious, and don't really have a lot of worth to give to wider literature as a whole. And obviously, I'm always trying to fight against that. I have videos defending our genre and why it's so important. But I wandered into one of these conversations again right after finishing A Monster Calls, and it just kind of made me come together for an idea of what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, we know many of our favorite SFF stories explore a lot of very serious subject matter, and especially grief and depression and trauma. And while many of these books do that and also have magic, I particularly was thinking about how the fantasy and sci-fi genres often are able to utilize magic to make grief and depression and trauma physical. That we can utilize magic in very direct ways to bring a voice to this topic that can often be difficult to understand and feel. These are books that explore grief through magical or speculative means, not just books that contain those themes within them. An example of what I mean that I think will be a touchstone for several people because it is such a famous book series is Harry Potter, and specifically Dementors and Patronuses. Dementors are magical creatures that represent everything dark, depressing, every horrible event that has ever happened to you, your worst memories, the cycle of depression. And yet, in this world, a single happy thought can produce a Patronus that banishes the monster. This kind of imagery sticks with people. The idea that holding on to a single happy thought, a single happy memory can help you navigate and banish these really hard times and difficult emotions. And while obviously exploring deep and difficult emotions has been the purpose of fiction since the dawn of time, I do think SFF allows another degree of separation, another degree of metaphor that can help you work through those difficult emotions, because often in a regular story, you might be being told how to feel, right? The reason metaphor has been such a utilized thing across all of fiction is because it allows things to be up for interpretation. And when you extend that metaphor to the entire novel because you are using speculative means to talk about these difficult emotions, I feel like the catharsis that can come from them is greater for the same reason. It's also able to quite simply put meaning and words and description to things that often feel undescribable and unrepresentable in the physical real worlds. And look, I'm not going to pretend I know a lot about grief or I'm some expert about grief. I did not study psychology. I did not, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any of those things. So as I say, don't take this as like fact, research. This is really talking about a lived experience and a lot of the people that I have interacted with and their grief and their lived experiences. But one thing I've done a little bit of research on is helping children through grief, simply because I'm a parent and I have children and I like to know how best to help my kids manage large emotions or difficult emotions. And through all that research, the thing that comes up again and again in how you help children is grief through play, or managing any emotions through play, and how that's often a very safe place for them to go through the emotions that they're dealing with that are often difficult in safe ways, that they can play act things that aren't safe or things they can't do in life, and it can help them come through that. And I was just thinking about that a lot as I was thinking about this topic. It doesn't seem like people talk about that for adults. And so again, this is not research based, but I thought, isn't just kind of reading fiction and reading fantasy just an extension of what they say is good for children, and that probably is still good for adults, which is safe spaces to explore really difficult emotions in ways that feel unreal, so they feel safe? That connection makes sense to me All of you actual people who know things, you let me know if that's true or not. But I've lived that experience. I was thinking immediately of how Sword of Kaigen by Emma Wong became such an important book to me, because there were some magical, unreal elements about fighting and sword having and all this stuff that actually expressed a feeling I didn't know I had about motherhood in a very real and physical way. And for me, that is a book that always just comes to mind when I think of sometimes that metaphor through speculative means can finally put voice to something that is hard. It is not like I hadn't read regular fiction books with portrayals of motherhood, but something about that kind of unreal and imaginative exploration explained the feeling I had better than the things I could do in the world. I don't feel like I'm making sense, but I hope that does. And another element to this that I think can be overlooked a lot is when you are in stories with magic and magical means and larger than life stories, it also means the solutions to your grief or problems or trauma can also be larger than life. And there can be something incredibly cathartic about that. And I think this might get overlooked when we think about why fandoms are so intense sometimes. I'm not saying to be a fan of something that's always the case, but I think a lot of people are fans of their works because it came at a very pivotal or important time in their life and it helped them through something difficult. I see that all the time. It's true of me. It's true of a lot of people. And I think we overuse the word escapism. I think the easy answer here is people go, oh, it's escape. You were able to escape into a new world and forget about your worries. And that's what all fiction is. It's escapism and fantasy in particular. And like, yes, I'm not denying that there is a level of escapism, but I think it also cheapens what can happen through SFF stories, which are that they can also provide this different exploration of things and really make manifest the emotions you're feeling in a way that speaks to you and helps you overcome those things. But anyway, all that to say, I was thinking about that because of A Monster Calls and what a wonderful story it is about grief. By the way, if I couldn't tell, like, excellent story. Highly recommend to everybody. It's pretty short. You can read it. But anyway, today I want to talk about 4 of my favorite explorations of grief through fantasy. The first one I want to talk about is the character of Death in the Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett. Now, I think Death is an interesting example because it does often feel quite comedic in nature. Death as a character is very funny, probably one of the most beloved characters, I would say, in Discworld. Definitely up there. And I love that Pratchett is able to make such humorous looks also deeply profound. Like, I particularly love Death's characterization exploration in the book Reaper Man. I think there's so much there, and Death often, even though comical, I think they have some of the best lines in all of the novels, also does a lot about life and what death means and short lives and lives that are taken too early. There's a lot there. And I think that it's easy because it's satirical to look past it, but I think that despite Pratchett's levity, there's a lot of depth there. And I know this is the case because I often see Terry Pratchett quotes in the wild, completely removed from Discworld, and people are always talking about how profound they are. The particular quote, this doesn't have to do with grief, but it's the one about boots, and the wealthy person can afford the boots that last for 10 years, and it's about class. And I see that everywhere as like, yes, this is like a deep thing about class. And it's so funny when you know what that's from, which is what Pratchett's so good at, these amazing satirical stories that tell you a lot about a lot of the issues in life. And Death is no exception to that. I should probably say it now because I'm kind of being purposely vague because I'm not going to be spoiling any of these novels. But I think if you maybe need a more satirical look or maybe more of a humorous but deeply meaningful look into death and grief, I always recommend the Death Path of Discworld, where he is featured character. The next exploration of grief, I'm actually combining 2 different stories into one because both of these use being able to see the future, or rather be out of a normal timeline, as a way to explore grief and trauma. And that would be Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut and Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. Now, Stories of Your Life and Others, if you're not familiar with that short story by Ted Chiang, that was the story that inspired the movie Arrival, which is actually an excellent adaptation of that short story. So if you've seen that movie, that's also what we're talking about. I love how removing yourself from time in both of these novels really help you explore grief and death and what the value of difficult experiences are, and is the grief, is that going to outweigh the things that brought you there, the love and happiness? And they're just very meaningful. Obviously, Slaughterhouse-5 is one of the most famous novels of all time. Like, it's considered a classic, and I think it's for a reason, because it has that ability to, humans can't view their whole lives at once. Humans can't see the end from the beginning, but what if you could, and what would you learn about it? The famous phrase from Slaughterhouse-5, of course, is "so it goes," and that very dark view on it, but cathartic at the same time. And I don't think these explorations of grief would be the same without that element of unreality, which is we can't view our whole lives from the beginning. Next, of course, the very obvious pick, which is the use of Spren in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This is the one I'm sure many of you here were waiting for, and I do think it's excellent. I think naturally our minds go to Kaladin, who is our main character who struggles with depression and is often considered to be such an excellent representation of depression because he never gets to defeat it. Which is true to life. It's something he's always struggling and living with, and watching him go through that and still succeed, I think, is very meaningful. But I think it's beyond just Kaladin. I think everybody in the Stormlight Archive is dealing with grief in their own ways through different traumatic experiences. If you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, Spren do give our heroes magical powers, and they are attracted to people with what they call gaps in their spirit web. And a way to explain this that is not spoilery is how the author himself described it, which is through the Japanese art of kintsugi. And I apologize, I don't speak Japanese, so if I said that wrong. But that is the art of fixing broken pottery with gold. I can show examples of this. And people often feel like the end result is even more beautiful than in the beginning. And that was Sanderson's inspiration, or he talks about that as an inspiration or a description of how Spren are with their humans. They help repair and renew somebody through their difficulties by, yes, giving them magic powers. And I do think that is there's a reason the Stormlight Archive has resonated with so many people. And I think being able to read a story with people going through very similar difficulties to you, but then this magical element, being able to heal them, and then, of course, yes, being solved in such out of this world way. I think of the end of Words of Radiance when one of our characters has been struggling through the entire book, and the catharsis of like they literally explode with power when they finally can kind of overcome that hump. And at the end of Oathbringer, which is the third book, in a very different way, where a very specific difficulty has been made physical and manifest and villainous, and seeing that character overcome that, trauma that a lot of us face in life, but made physical, is so incredible. And I think it's just one of my favorite examples of using magical means to describe grief and how that comes about. Again, it's interacting in the world in ways that we can't and giving voice to something we feel in just a kind of a nicer way to think about it. And finally, I want to talk about the character of Rand al'Thor in The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Now, the event in particular I'm thinking about does happen in books 12 and 13 of the Wheel of Time, which is, I'm asking thousands of pages of time commitment, I understand, but I don't want to spoil it for you, so I will say it this way. Our poor character, Rand, has been through a lot. He's been through a lot, and he's really struggling. And he has this very cathartic moment, and there's also this healing character named Nynaeve, and she wants to help heal him, and there's this kind of scene between them where she is kind of looking into him to heal this and make some discoveries about what his experiences have done. And it is a scene that has stuck with me deeply. Like, I think could rival my favorite scenes of the whole series, which is saying a lot because there's a lot of great moments. But how Jordan used magic to kind of represent a very real emotion with depression and difficulties and trauma, I think was just done excellently. And I think about it all the time. I can't really say more than that, but it says a lot about grief and pain. And I think Rand and his journey has some great examples of what that is without dismissing it or making it an easy fix. I'm always here to defend my beloved genre, but I honestly do think, like, there is this dismissiveness. I think some magical realism and some fantasy has been put into classic categories where they're taken very seriously. And you see this all the time when you can go watch my Defense of Fantasy video where I cover this more intensely. And those often just get shelved in literary fiction and we've moved on. But it's like so much of the fantasy I love and read deal with a lot of stuff. Today I talked about grief and trauma, but deal with so many difficult things in life, are just often explored in ways that I find honestly more interesting and deeper than in regular fiction I read. And that's why I think I keep coming back and back to this genre. Other than the fact that, yeah, magic is cool. I'd love to hear your opinions on any of these books or series I talked about today, or tell me your favorite representations of grief that you have seen in SFF. I'd love to hear about it. And as always, if you like these kind of deep dives or videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.